Snow covered Copper Creek so completely that the abandoned Arizona mine looked peaceful again. But beneath the frozen rails, someone had reopened a passage that official maps said no longer existed. Former Navy SEAL Nolan Vance arrived with Morrow, a German shepherd trained to find explosives, not forgotten lives. The only resident left was August Yazzie, a 79-year-old Diné veteran guarding boxes of names the mine had erased. When fresh chemicals appeared beneath the snow, an old crime and a new threat began moving through the same tunnels. To save the water below, Nolan would have to trust the old man, the frightened dog, and a history no agency had protected. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help Seal Dog Legends reach 1,000 subscribers. The road to Copper Creek narrowed until the snow stopped looking clean. For the last 20 miles, it had lain smooth across the high desert, bright beneath a hard blue sky. Near the abandoned mine, the white surface became streaked with rust-red dust. Juniper branches rose from the drifts like dark hands, and lengths of old rail surfaced and vanished beneath the road. Nolan Vance slowed the truck as the first buildings appeared. At 43, Nolan had the thick shoulders and deliberate movements of a man who had spent most of his adult life carrying weight other people never saw. His scalp was bare across the crown, with dark hair clipped close along the sides. A short beard, already threaded with copper gray, sharpened the angles of his jaw. The bridge of his nose leaned slightly left from an old break, and a thin scar divided the outer edge of his left eyebrow. He did not think of those marks as history. History was what people called damage once it had stopped hurting them. Beside him, Morrow raised his head from the rear seat. The 7-year-old German shepherd had a long working build, a straight back, and a deep chest under a coat of dark honey and black. The tip of his right ear bent slightly outward, the result of an injury years ago, while the left remained perfectly upright. A pale scar crossed the bridge of his muzzle. His amber eyes followed the ruined roofs ahead without excitement. "Nothing yet," Nolan said. Morrow's ears shifted toward his voice, but the dog kept watching the town. Copper Creek stood on a high plateau in northern Arizona, far above the heat most outsiders associated with the state. Snow covered the roofs of the assay office, the boarding house, and the old maintenance sheds. The headframe above the main shaft rose black against the sky. Beyond it, low red hills held the last bands of sunlight. The place had not collapsed in any dramatic way. It had simply been left behind. That made it worse. Nolan parked near a weather-beaten sign half buried in snow. Only a few letters remained visible beneath the peeling paint. Copy. CR? K. Population 301. Someone had crossed out the numbers long ago. He stepped down into the cold, wearing an olive-drab combat shirt beneath an open charcoal soft shell. The camouflage sleeves were faded enough to blend with the muted winter landscape, and 2 dark bands circled each upper arm. He pulled on tan gloves, checked the gas meter clipped to his belt, then opened the rear door. Morrow jumped down without a command. The dog stood still for several seconds, testing the air. Nolan watched the change come over him, nose lifting, nostrils working, body quiet. The harness across Morrow's chest was brown charcoal with a dull reflective strip that caught the light only when he moved. Nolan took out his waterproof notebook and wrote the time, temperature, wind direction, and arrival mileage. He had once trusted memory. Then he had learned that memory could bend itself around guilt until both became impossible to separate. The official assignment was limited. North Star Reclamation had sealed 6 mine entrances 3 years earlier. Nolan's job was to verify the closures, identify any remaining explosive hazards, and prepare marked access points for the licensed disposal team that would arrive after his survey. He was not there to enter unstable tunnels alone, dismantle firing systems, or prove anything heroic. He had accepted the contract partly because of that restraint. The reassessment had been ordered after Dr. Leona Begay, a hydrologist with Navajo Nation EPA, found unusual concentrations of heavy metals in wells downstream. The contamination might have come from old tailings shifting under freeze and thaw cycles. It might also have come from drainage channels North Star claimed were no longer active. The report said Copper Creek had no residents. The chimney smoke said otherwise. It rose from a small house north of the mine yard, a thin gray line against the sky. The building sat beyond a leaning fence, separated from the industrial ruins by a shallow wash filled with snow. Nolan looked at Morrow. The dog was already facing the house. They crossed the wash on foot. Nolan saw stacked firewood under a corrugated awning, a fresh shovel mark along the path, and boot prints leading from the porch to a propane tank. The front door opened before he knocked. The man standing there was tall enough that age had not diminished him completely. He was thin, his shoulders sloped beneath a brown wool coat, but his posture remained controlled. Silver hair, still dark in places, was tied low at the back of his neck. Deep lines framed his eyes and mouth. His hands were broad, the knuckles enlarged from decades of work. He studied Nolan first, then Morrow. "You're later than the letter said," the man said. "The road took longer than expected." "The road always does." His voice was dry rather than hostile. "Nolan Vance, survey lead." "August Yazzie." Nolan glanced toward the house. A dented blue enamel thermos sat on the porch rail. Beside the door hung a yellow mining helmet with the faded number 17 painted across the front. "Your property wasn't included in the residence file," Nolan said. "That file calls this place unoccupied." "It does." August looked past him toward the silent buildings. "Then the file is wrong before you even begin." Morrow approached the porch, but stopped 2 steps below August. The old man did not reach for him. He waited. After a moment, Morrow climbed 1 step and lowered his nose toward August's gloved hand. Nolan watched more closely than he intended. Morrow did not greet strangers easily. He tolerated them when working. He evaluated them. Affection was rare and usually delayed. August let the dog finish, then stepped back. "The mine boundary starts beyond the wash," he said. "This house and the strip behind it are mine, recorded private inholding. Your people have the documents, even if they misplace the fact that I'm alive. I'll confirm the parcel record." "You should." There was no challenge in the words. That irritated Nolan more than open resistance would have. He explained the survey, the hazard perimeter, and the possibility of unstable explosives. August listened without interrupting. When Nolan finished, the old man's gaze moved toward the eastern ridge. "The maps you have won't show the second ventilation run." "Which maps have you seen?" "All the ones that survived." "And the service drift?" "Not on the company version?" Nolan opened his notebook. "Where is it?" August gave him a long look. "That depends on which year your map pretends the mountains stopped changing." Nolan felt the familiar tightening behind his ribs, the response he had to people who answered procedure with riddles. He kept his voice even. "I need you to remain outside the marked area while we work. I have no reason to enter it." "Good. But if the wind comes out of a wall where your map says there is solid rock, don't call it imagination." Nolan met his eyes. August's expression held no trace of performance, no attempt to impress him. Only an old certainty sharpened by years of being ignored. Morrow turned his head between the 2 men. For a moment, Nolan had the uncomfortable sense that the dog was not waiting for his command. He was measuring the distance between them. They left August at the house and began at the westernmost closure. Nolan placed orange markers in the snow, checked atmospheric readings, and ran the cable camera toward the sealed face. Everything matched the report: concrete plug, identification plate, weathering consistent with 3 winters. At the second site, 1 anchor bolt had shifted but remained secure. The third entrance lay below the old crushing mill, where drifts of snow had gathered against a retaining wall. North Star's documentation identified it as Portal C4, sealed and cleared of accessible explosive material. Morrow changed before Nolan saw anything wrong. The dog slowed, then moved in a shallow arc across the snow. His head lowered. His breathing became sharper, more deliberate. He ignored the rusted barrels near the wall and returned to a patch beside the concrete seal. Nolan gave him room. Morrow sat. It was the trained alert, clean, still, unmistakable. Nolan's pulse remained steady, but his attention narrowed. "Good," he said quietly. He moved Morrow back, marked the location, and took out a field test kit. The snow near the seal had been disturbed, though someone had brushed it flat with a wide tool. Beneath the top layer, Nolan found a faint, oily discoloration on a piece of fractured stone. The test strip changed color. Industrial explosive residue, not decades old. Recent enough that weather had not washed it away. Nolan crouched, studying the ground beyond the marked point. A pair of shallow parallel depressions crossed the snow toward the service road. Tire tracks. Most of them had been swept over with a branch or broom, but the pressure beneath the surface remained. He followed them for 12 yards before they disappeared under wind-blown powder. When Nolan returned to the seal, Morrow was not looking at the alert point anymore. The dog was watching the distant house. August stood beyond the perimeter with his hands in his coat pockets. He had not approached. Snow moved around his boots in thin ribbons. Nolan took the identification sheet from his case and compared it with the metal plate embedded beside the seal. The plate read C7. The report showed C4. He checked again, slower this time. The coordinates matched the report. The photographs did not. August spoke from beyond the flags. "That isn't the opening they sealed." Nolan straightened. "You're certain?" "I helped wire the emergency lights down there." "That was more than 40 years ago." "Yes." The answer carried no defensiveness. August pointed toward the base of the slope, not at the concrete wall, but several yards to the right. The old entrance was lower. The winter of '91 buried part of the approach. North Star poured concrete here because it was easier to reach. Nolan looked at the wall, the mismatched plate, and the residue in the snow. The first reaction inside him was not belief. It was anger, not at August, at the report, at the clean photographs, the exact measurements, the signatures lined up in approved boxes, at the ease with which official certainty could be manufactured. He wrote the discrepancy in his notebook. This time, beneath the numbers, he added August Yazzie's name. By late afternoon, the cold sharpened. Nolan suspended the survey and photographed the site from multiple angles. He secured the markers, uploaded what data he could through the weak connection, then returned to the truck. The sun dropped behind the red hills, turning the snow lavender. Copper Creek seemed to flatten into shadow. Windows darkened one by one, though no lights had been burning inside them. August's chimney still gave off smoke. Nolan closed the equipment case and called Morrow. The dog did not move. He stood facing the center of town, body rigid but not aggressive. His right ear tilted outward, the bent tip catching the last light. Morrow. Nothing. Then a single bulb glowed inside the abandoned head frame. It burned yellow behind a broken window high above the mine yard. Nolan stared at it. The electrical service to Copper Creek had been disconnected years ago. The line poles were down in 2 places. No generator sound carried through the cold. The light went out. Morrow remained motionless. He did not bark or pull at the lead. He simply watched the dark tower, eyes fixed on something Nolan could neither hear nor see. Beneath the wind, faint enough to be mistaken for settling metal, came a dull sound from somewhere under the town. Not an explosion. A movement. Then silence returned to Copper Creek, deeper than before. By 7 the next morning, the single light in the head frame had become a problem no instrument could explain. Nolan had checked the tower before sunrise. The windows were broken, the electrical panels stripped, and the line running toward the old substation had been severed years ago. He found no battery, portable lamp, or recent footprints on the stairs. He recorded what he had seen without trying to name it. At 7:18, he transmitted the photographs of the mismatched portal plate, the explosive residue test, and the partially erased tire tracks to Dr. Mara Ellison. Her reply came 12 minutes later. Freeze the site. No entry. I'm coming in. Mara arrived shortly before 10 in a mud-splashed government utility vehicle. She stepped out wearing a steel blue technical jacket and a white hard hat marked by a single blue stripe. Her ash-blonde hair had been cut close enough that the wind barely moved it. Freckles crossed the bridge of her narrow face, and a blue geological pencil was tucked behind one ear. She did not greet Nolan with small talk. "Show me the plate." He led her to the closure beneath the crushing mill. Morrow remained outside the marked perimeter, watching from beside the truck. Mara examined the steel tag, the anchor bolts, and North Star's certification photographs on her tablet. She removed her glasses, cleaned them with the edge of her sleeve, and looked again. "The coordinates are correct," she said. "The portal isn't." That conclusion depends on August Yazzie's memory. It also depends on the plate saying C7, while the report says C4. Mara pressed her thumb against the tablet screen as though the pressure might force the records to align. North Star used multiple subcontractors during the first phase. Numbering errors happened. Explosive residue doesn't come from a clerical error. No, it doesn't. The admission cost her something. Nolan heard it in the pause that followed. Mara ordered the closure treated as an active hazard and contacted North Star Reclamation from the mine office, where one wall still carried a faded calendar from 1986. The company answered quickly. Too quickly, Nolan thought, though he had no evidence that speed meant guilt. Silas Crowder arrived before noon. He drove a dark pickup with the North Star logo printed modestly on the door. At 58, Silas was tall and lean, with broad shoulders hidden beneath a tobacco-brown shearling coat. His silver-blonde hair was combed back from a high forehead, and a narrow beard framed his chin while his cheeks remained clean-shaven. One lower eyelid sagged slightly, giving him a look of permanent fatigue that softened his otherwise careful expression. He shook Mara's hand first, then Nolan's. "Mr. Vance, I read the preliminary note." His grip was firm without becoming a contest. Silas looked toward Morrow. "Beautiful dog." Morrow. "Working today?" "When needed." Silas accepted the boundary in Nolan's answer and turned toward the sealed portal. He did not deny the mismatch. He crouched beside the identification plate, took several photographs, and blamed the discrepancy on a subcontractor that had dissolved 2 years earlier. "We had 3 numbering systems in circulation," he said. "Original mine designations, state inventory numbers, and our internal remediation codes. A field supervisor could have carried the wrong plate." "And the fresh residue?" Nolan asked. Silas's expression did not change. "Could be contamination from old storage. Could be illegal shooting activity. Could be a sample error. I'd rather not speculate until a laboratory confirms it." The answer was reasonable. That made Nolan distrust it, less than he wanted to. Silas opened the back of his truck and produced copies of equipment logs, crew rosters, concrete orders, and closure photographs. Everything had dates. Everything had signatures. He offered a remote camera unit with a longer cable and a North Star technician to operate it. Nolan declined the technician but accepted the camera. Silas glanced toward August's house, where smoke rose steadily from the chimney. "I was told the area was unoccupied." "So was I," Nolan said. "That's a liability problem. Weather Service has a storm front moving in tomorrow night. I can arrange temporary lodging for Mr. Yazzie. He owns the parcel. Ownership doesn't make falling rock less dangerous." Again, the statement was sensible. Silas offered no bribe, no threat, and no visible impatience. When Mara told him the site would remain frozen pending review, he nodded as though he had expected nothing else. "I'll make my archive available," he said. "If we made a mistake, I want it found before someone gets hurt." As Silas drove away, Nolan watched the truck until it disappeared behind the snow-covered ridge. "You expected him to sweat?" Mara asked. "I expected something." "That's not evidence." "No." Mara adjusted the blue pencil behind her ear. "Neither is politeness." They began the inspection shortly after 1. No one entered the portal. Nolan ran atmospheric tests at the opening, then fed North Star's camera through a narrow gap near the concrete edge. Oxygen readings remained normal. No methane or hydrogen sulfide appeared at dangerous levels. The camera passed through 6 feet of fractured rock and stopped against what should have been a collapsed interior wall. Nolan rotated the lens. Dust moved across the image. Not falling dust, drifting dust. "There's airflow," Mara said. Nolan attached a light strip to the cable and advanced it another 18 inches. The image widened into darkness. Beyond the apparent collapse lay an open void large enough to absorb the light. Mara studied the structural drawings. There shouldn't be space behind that wall. August had approached no closer than the outer flags. He wore his brown winter coat and carried the dented blue thermos in one hand. "There's space," he said. Mara looked at him. "Based on what?" "The dust." "We can see the dust." "You're watching it move left." Nolan checked the screen again. August pointed toward the upper corner of the opening. "Cold air is entering low. Warmer air is leaving high. That isn't a pocket behind a collapse. It connects somewhere." Mara enlarged the mine ventilation diagram. Every marked drift in that direction ended beneath solid rock. August sipped from the thermos. "Then the drawing is incomplete." A gust struck the sheet metal side of the crushing mill. The panel bowed inward and snapped back with a deep metallic boom. Morrow recoiled. It was not a dramatic reaction. No barking, no attempt to flee. His front paws shifted backward, his shoulders lowered, and his eyes fixed on the vibrating wall. For 1 second he seemed unable to choose between the sound and Nolan. Nolan moved immediately. "Out!" He led Morrow away from the structure, beyond the point where the metal's echo faded. He knelt, loosened the working lead, and waited without touching him. Morrow watched from the portal. August did not. The old man walked 20 feet away and sat on a low timber half buried in snow. He placed the blue thermos beside his boot and rested both hands on his knees. He did not call Morrow, offer food, or speak in the soft voice strangers often used around nervous animals. He simply made room. Several minutes passed. Morrow's breathing slowed. His attention returned first to Nolan, then to the mine, and finally to August. The dog crossed the snow on his own and stopped near the old man. August kept his hands still. Morrow moved closer until his shoulder touched August's knee. Only then did August place his palm against the dog's chest. Nolan felt something inside him resist the scene. Not jealousy, something less reasonable. Morrow had worked beside Nolan through gunfire, helicopter vibration, collapsing structures, and long nights when neither had slept. Nolan knew every signal the dog had been taught, and most of the ones Morrow had invented for himself. Yet August had understood what not to do without being told. "Steel sings longer underground," August said, still looking at Morrow. "Some sounds don't stop when the air goes quiet." Nolan knew the remark was not only about the dog. He chose not to answer. By mid-afternoon, another vehicle arrived from the east. Dr. Leona Begay stepped out carrying a hard-sided sample case the color of desert sand. She had a solid build, a long black and silver braid resting over her left shoulder, and translucent square-framed glasses. Her dark teal parka stood out against the snow without looking bright. Leona greeted August with familiarity but no ceremony. Their conversation began with the weather, then shifted immediately to the wells. She spread 3 charts across the hood of Mara's vehicle. If the contamination came from normal seasonal seepage, she said, we'd see a gradual rise during thaw periods. We don't. The lines on the charts rose in narrow spikes, separated by weeks of lower readings. These are pulses, Nolan said. Leona nodded. Short releases, similar chemistry each time, but not identical concentrations. Someone opening a drainage route? Possibly, or dumping into one. Mara looked toward the sealed portal. North Star reported every lower drainage channel inactive. Then either the water learned to read their report, Leona said, or the report is wrong. August almost smiled. Leona removed a waterproof yellow notebook from her case and showed them a rough map of the watershed. The contamination path began near Copper Creek, followed an intermittent channel, and spread toward a recharge zone feeding several downstream wells. We're not looking at a dead mine slowly leaking, she said. Something here is still changing. August returned to his house before sunset. When Nolan came to ask about the ventilation route, the old man opened the door, holding a narrow black ledger wrapped in cloth. It was not an original company map. The pages contained handwritten measurements, pressure notes, survey marks, and corrections made in different inks. Several sheets had been removed cleanly near the center. My friend Elias Dunn kept this, August said. Survey engineer, his daughter sent it after he died last spring. Nolan turned to a page showing a service drift beneath the tailings area. The line ended where a missing sheet should have continued it. Why didn't you give this to Mara yesterday? I had not decided whether she would keep it safe. And now? August looked toward Morrow, sleeping near the stove. Now there are too many people lying for one old man to keep being cautious alone. Nolan photocopied the relevant pages and returned the ledger. That night, he placed motion sensors along the Western Service Road and near the unexplained closure. He did not expect them to record anything. Anyone using Copper Creek would know the site had been frozen. At 4:37 in the morning, the receiver sounded. A vehicle had entered from the west. Nolan reached the outer road within minutes. The snow was still falling lightly, preserving fresh tire impressions. They led past the headframe, curved behind the tailing slope, and ended at a wall of reddish stone. Not turned around. Ended. Morrow worked the base of the wall, nose moving slowly through the cold air. Then he stopped and sat. The explosive alert. Nolan cleared loose snow from the rock. Beneath it, he found a seam too straight to be natural. He pressed a gloved hand against the surface and felt cold metal behind a thin skin of textured material. He moved farther along the wall and found the outline of a hinge. The stone was not stone. It was a steel door coated to imitate the surrounding cliff. North Star's records declared the entire western access permanently closed. Someone had not merely reopened Copper Creek. Someone had built a way to enter without appearing on any map. Celia Nez arrived at Copper Creek without a convoy, warning lights, or the performance of authority. Her government SUV came down the eastern road just after noon, moving slowly through fresh snow. She parked beside Mara's vehicle, stepped out, and spent several seconds studying the headframe before acknowledging anyone waiting for her. She was 46, compactly built, with the balanced stance of someone accustomed to uneven ground. Her dark hair ended at her shoulders, except for a clean streak of silver at the right temple. A navy softshell covered a rust-colored turtleneck, and the badge she showed Nolan appeared only long enough to establish who she was. Celia Nez, EPA Criminal Investigation Division. Her handshake was brief. Nolan glanced at the SUV. You came alone? The people who need to know where I am know where I am. That wasn't my question. It was the answer you needed. Mara stepped between them before Nolan could respond. She handed Celia a tablet containing photographs of the false rock door, the mismatched portal numbers, and the contamination charts Leona had brought. Celia reviewed everything without comment. Her face remained still even when she reached the image of the steel hinge beneath the artificial stone. "How many people have received these files?" she asked. "Mara's project office," Nolan said. "My operations coordinator. North Star was notified of the closure discrepancy yesterday. No more uploads through the contractor portal. That system is required for the survey. It's also compromised." Nolan folded his arms. "Based on what?" Celia turned the tablet toward Mara. "Do you recognize these reports?" 2 closure certificates filled the screen. Both carried Mara's electronic signature and approval code. Mara adjusted her glasses. Her expression tightened. "I've never seen either one." "Your credentials approved them 11 months ago." "That's impossible." "No," Celia said. "It's inconvenient." Mara scrolled through the documents. Each page looked authentic. Project number, location coordinates, photographic attachments, budget codes. Even the language resembled her own. Nolan understood why Celia had told them to stop transmitting. Someone had not merely falsified field data. Someone had learned how official truth was built and had begun producing it on demand. Celia removed a black evidence notebook from her coat. A thin red line ran around its cover. "From this point forward, every photograph is duplicated locally. Every sample gets a handwritten chain of custody record. No one outside this group receives the inspection schedule until I clear it." "You're taking control of the site?" Nolan asked. "I'm controlling evidence connected to a possible federal crime. You still control explosive safety." The division was reasonable. Nolan disliked how quickly she had defined it. Leona came from the temporary sampling table carrying a sealed container of dark sediment. She greeted Celia with familiarity, though not warmth. "You finally believed me," Leona said. "I believed your numbers 6 weeks ago." "You didn't open a criminal case 6 weeks ago." "I didn't have falsified federal records 6 weeks ago." August stood near his fence, the blue enamel thermos hanging from one hand. He had watched Celia arrive without approaching. Celia looked across the wash. "Does he know why I'm here?" August answered for himself. "I assume no one drove this far to admire the architecture." He invited them into the house shortly afterward. The front room was warmer than Nolan expected. A wood stove clicked softly near one wall. Morrow settled beside it, harness removed, his bent right ear turned toward the conversation. August led Nolan, Celia, and Leona through a narrow hallway. Mara remained at the mine office to secure the compromised project files. The room at the back of the house had no windows. Shelves lined every wall. Cardboard archive boxes stood in careful rows, each labeled by year, department, or shift. Metal drawers held envelopes wrapped in cotton tape. Photographs had been placed inside clear protective sleeves rather than framed. There was no hidden fortune, no cache of weapons, no dramatic proof waiting beneath a loose floorboard. There were pay stubs, medical invoices, letters written on lined paper, time cards with grease-darkened edges, photographs of men standing beneath the Copper Creek headframe, lunch pails at their feet, squinting into the sun as though the future were merely another shift waiting to begin. Nolan moved closer to one picture. 17 men stood in 2 rows. Some wore hard hats, others held them against their thighs. August was among the youngest, his face thinner and his dark hair tied behind his neck. "How long have you kept all this?" Nolan asked. "Some of it was mine," August said. "The rest came when people died, moved, or decided remembering was too expensive." Celia opened her evidence notebook but did not begin writing. August pulled one box from a lower shelf. The label read, "Night Shift, February 1984. He placed 5 time cards on the table. 3 carried names: Rafael Ortega, Samuel Pete, Leon Mercer. The remaining 2 showed only employee numbers and handwritten nicknames. Birdie, and red clay. The collapse killed 12, Nolan said. 12 were listed. August removed a newspaper clipping from the box. The headline reported the recovery effort and the official number of fatalities. Beneath it lay a company roster with 12 names highlighted. These 5 worked the same night, August said. Temporary labor, paid through a subcontractor that folded 3 months later. Leona examined the cards. Were they underground when the collapse happened? They clocked in. That doesn't prove where they were. No. August did not resist the limitation. He had lived with it too long. He laid out a shift supervisor's handwritten note, a canteen receipt for 17 meals, and a maintenance request signed by Rafael Ortega less than an hour before the collapse. The official crew count was 12, August said. The kitchen prepared 17 dinners. 17 lamps were checked out. 12 were returned by the recovery team. Nolan looked again at the 2 cards without legal names. Why only nicknames? Men arrived through labor brokers. Sometimes payroll took weeks to catch up. Sometimes it never did. Families? 3 families were found. 2 never were. Celia finally wrote something. What happened to the original investigation? She asked. Which one? The state mine inquiry. It confirmed the company's list. And the later review? Closed for lack of new evidence? You submitted these records? Copies. Celia looked up. Where are they now? August's mouth tightened. That is the right question. He told them about investigators who came during different decades, a state inspector who photographed the cards and was transferred before issuing a finding, a university team that borrowed interview tapes and returned only half of them, a lawyer who promised the families a civil petition, then disappeared after the mine company changed ownership. None of the stories proved a coordinated conspiracy. That made them harder to dismiss. Institutions did not need to gather in one room and agree to forget someone. They only needed to lose the same person one document at a time. August placed Elias Dunn's black survey ledger beside the 5 time cards. The missing service drift runs behind the old collapse zone. Dunn believed there was a maintenance chamber beyond it. You believe the bodies are there, Nolan said. I believe they might be. August's restraint carried more weight than certainty would have. The closure project could seal the only remaining approach, he continued. Once they fill the drainage side and stabilize the slope, no agency will authorize reopening it on the strength of 5 time cards. Nolan understood then that August had not remained in Copper Creek because he could not leave the past. He had remained because the past was still in danger. Celia turned a page in her notebook. When did you receive Dunn's ledger? Last spring. Leona looked at August sharply. You've had it for months? Yes. And you didn't give it to the water team. It did not contain water data. It showed an unrecorded tunnel beneath the tailings area. It showed part of one. That could have changed where I sampled. August's voice hardened. Or it could have disappeared into another file cabinet. People are drinking from those wells. And 5 men have been underground for 42 years. The room seemed to contract around the sentence. Leona placed both hands on the table. The dead are not safer because the living remain uninformed. August's eyes shifted to her. The dead are not less important because they can no longer complain. Celia closed her notebook. My father worked reclamation sites, she said. He used to bring home stories about men who believed keeping a secret was the same as protecting it. August did not answer. Celia continued quietly. Sometimes they were right, for a while. Then the secret became dependent on one body, one memory, one locked room. When that person died, everything died with them. You think federal custody guarantees survival? No. I think duplication improves the odds. She pointed to the boxes around them. 1 copy with you, one with Navajo Nation EPA, one entered into federal evidence, one with legal counsel outside both systems. No single office gets the power to erase it. August looked at the 5 time cards. Nolan expected another refusal. Instead, August removed a small key from his pocket and unlocked a steel cabinet beneath the shelves. Inside were cassette recordings, photographs, and 3 more ledgers. "Start with the tapes," he said. "Some of the voices are gone now." It was not surrender. It was a transfer of weight. Morrow rose from beside the stove and entered the room. He moved directly to August, resting his shoulder against the old man's leg. August placed one hand on the dog's neck without looking down. For the first time since Nolan arrived, the archive room no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a door opening. They worked through the afternoon. Celia photographed documents and assigned evidence numbers. Leona cross-referenced dates with historical water flow records. Nolan scanned the old mine sketches, searching for any line that could correspond to the artificial western entrance. Near dusk, Mara called from the mine office. "The camera is through the door." They returned to the site under a sky already turning gray. The false rock panel had not been opened. Nolan had fed the longer camera through a narrow maintenance gap near its base after confirming the surrounding air remained safe. The monitor showed a reinforced corridor extending into the slope. Steel ribs supported the ceiling. Electrical conduit ran along one wall. The floor had been leveled recently enough that tire impressions remained in the dust. Empty pallets stood against a side chamber, their wood too clean to have survived decades underground. Leona leaned closer to the screen. "Stop there." A dark residue had collected around a floor drain. Using a sampling arm attached to the camera cable, Nolan retrieved a small quantity. The material contained old reddish mine sediment mixed with a smoother black sludge carrying a sharp chemical odor. "Modern waste in legacy tailings," Leona said. "Useful if someone wants the contamination to look historical." The camera advanced. A flexible industrial pipe disappeared through a newly cut opening in the wall, angling toward the old mine drainage network. Celia recorded the images without speaking. Farther inside, Nolan found the corner of a plastic shipping label stuck beneath a pallet. He manipulated the camera arm until it came free. The label bore no company name, only a barcode and a short alphanumeric sequence. Mara entered it into North Star's public manifest database. A match appeared. "Internal transfer code," she said. "North Star Equipment Division." Celia photographed the result. "That connects them to the corridor," Nolan said. "It connects their property to the corridor," Celia corrected. "We still need to prove who moved it and why." Nolan guided the camera deeper. The corridor narrowed near an old junction where original stone met new concrete. Along the right wall ran a black insulated cable held in place by fresh metal clips. It did not power lights. It bypassed every junction box and continued into the darkness. Nolan zoomed in on the markings printed along its casing. "Signal cable. Recently installed." Mara pulled up the original mine plan. The corridor ahead angled beneath the tailings containment area. The room fell silent. The pallets and chemical residue suggested someone had been using Copper Creek. The cable suggested they had prepared to do more than enter and leave. On the monitor, the black line disappeared around a bend, running toward the old drainage tunnel beneath the waste embankment. Nolan marked the location in his Navy notebook. Beside the coordinates, he wrote 5 names. 3 legal names, 2 nicknames. Then he drew a line beneath them and added 1 word. Active. Mara spent the morning proving that she had approved work she had never seen. She sat alone in the abandoned mine office with 3 laptops open across a steel desk. Dust coated the old filing cabinets and a faded evacuation diagram curled away from the wall behind her. Outside, the winter sky had lost its blue. Clouds gathered over the western plateau, flattening the light across Copper Creek. The first false report concerned a ventilation shaft 12 miles south of town. The document stated that Morrow had reviewed atmospheric readings, verified the concrete closure, and accepted North Star's photographic evidence. She had never visited the shaft. The second report cleared an eastern adit that had not appeared on her inspection schedule at all. Both documents carried her encrypted signature, employee identification number, and the exact phrasing she used in legitimate approvals. Whoever had created them had not simply stolen a password, they had studied her habits. Celia stood behind her, reading over one shoulder. "Check the authentication history," she said. Morrow opened the access logs. The approvals had been submitted through the credentials of Evan Rusk, a former regional data manager who had left North Star 8 months earlier. His account should have been disabled when his contract ended. Instead, it had remained active. The login times coincided with truck movements listed in North Star's waste manifests. Morrow removed her glasses and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "I approved the template they copied," she said. "You approved a template," Celia replied. "You did not approve these sites." "I taught them what my approval was supposed to look like." Celia did not offer comfort. "Then help me show the difference." Morrow printed the reports 1 page at a time. On each signature line she wrote in blue geological pencil, "I did not inspect this site." The words were not legal evidence by themselves, but the act changed something in her posture. She stopped treating the fraud as a technical irregularity and began treating it as a theft committed through her name. Nolan entered with his Navy notebook open. "The camera cable is secured. No change in gas readings at the false entrance." Celia showed him the access logs. "Rusk's credentials were used to certify closures and generate transportation releases," she said. "Same account, same nights." Nolan studied the timestamps. "North Star trucks entered Copper Creek after those releases?" "According to their manifests, the trucks were carrying contaminated soil away from the mine." Morrow brought up the vehicle weights. "Outbound trucks were sometimes heavier than when they arrived," she said. Nolan looked at her. "That doesn't happen when you remove material." "Not unless the scales were falsified, too." Celia placed several manifests side by side. Trucks registered as carrying mine waste had traveled between Copper Creek, a private transfer yard near Flagstaff, and an industrial site across the state line. The recorded times left narrow gaps in which no roadside inspection was likely. "They built a legal shell around every trip," Celia said. "Hazardous material placards, environmental permits, sealed containers. Most officers would rather verify the paperwork than open a drum labeled toxic." "What were they moving?" Nolan asked. "We don't know yet. Chemical precursors, cash, packaged narcotics, possibly all three on different runs." Leona entered, carrying a roll of maps beneath one arm. Snow had begun melting across the shoulders of her dark teal parka. "I know where they were putting what they couldn't transport," she said. They spread the watershed maps over the desk. Leona had layered current sampling results on top of historical mine drainage plans. The old lines were faint and incomplete, but the contamination pulses followed a pattern. Each spike began downstream several days after a North Star vehicle appeared in Copper Creek's digital access log. "They used the mine sludge as cover," Leona said. "Modern industrial waste was introduced into an existing contaminated system. By the time it reached the wells, anyone testing it would blame the old mine." Nolan thought of the black residue around the hidden corridor's drain. "The dry tunnel was temporary storage," he said. "And the drainage network disposed of whatever they couldn't take back out," Celia added. Morrow stared at the maps. They weren't hiding inside an abandoned mine. They were operating through a permitted cleanup site. The distinction mattered. A criminal trespasser left broken locks and tire tracks. A licensed contractor left reports. Celia called Silas Crowder from a secure federal line and placed the phone on speaker. Silas answered on the third ring. "I assume this concerns the Western access," he said. "It concerns Evan Rusk's credentials," Celia replied. A pause followed, brief enough to be professional. "Rusk was terminated for procedural violations." "Why was his account still active?" "That would be a question for our information technology department." "His credentials approved closures that were never inspected." "If that's true, North Star will cooperate fully." "Your trucks used those approvals to enter Copper Creek." "We serviced multiple remediation sites. I won't speculate about records I haven't reviewed." Silas's voice remained calm. No anger, no fear. He sounded like a man discussing an insurance dispute. Celia asked whether North Star had installed the hidden western door. "I have no knowledge of such a structure." "Did North Star place equipment inside the corridor?" "I can't authenticate what your camera may have recorded." "You can authenticate your transfer code. If company property was misused by a former employee, I want that discovered as much as you do." Silas then shifted the conversation toward the weather. A severe winter front was expected before nightfall. Wind could close the eastern pass, and the old tailings embankment had not been engineered for rapid snowmelt. North Star maintained a private mine response team less than 2 hours away. Silas offered to send it immediately. "We can provide pumps, structural shoring, transport, and emergency shelter," he said. "Whatever else you believe, I don't want anyone trapped there." Nolan looked at Celia. It was exactly what a responsible contractor should offer. Celia declined without sounding suspicious. "Federal and county resources have been notified." "Those teams won't reach you before the storm." "We'll manage." Silas exhaled quietly. "Agent Nez, people sometimes become so concerned with preserving evidence that they forget the evidence is surrounded by unstable ground." The line went dead after he ended the call. No threat had been spoken. None was necessary. Leona returned to the maps. She traced the new signal cable from the hidden corridor toward an old drainage tunnel beneath the tailings embankment. The embankment was not a concrete dam. It was a broad slope of compacted earth and waste rock built decades earlier to retain copper tailings. The drainage tunnel beneath it allowed runoff to pass without eroding the base. "If they collapse this section," Leona said, marking a narrow point under the slope, "water backs up inside the fill." Mara followed the contour lines. "The foundation saturates. Then the embankment slumps." "And the next thaw carries the tailings into the seasonal wash," Nolan said. Leona nodded. "From there, it enters the recharge zone for the downstream wells." They were not facing a blast intended to destroy Copper Creek in one spectacular moment. The plan was colder than that. A controlled collapse would erase the hidden corridor, bury the drainage connection, scatter chemical evidence through decades of mine waste, and allow North Star to call the contamination a winter failure in an obsolete structure. The storm would become an accomplice. Mara stared at the blue pencil still in her hand. "My office would have accepted that explanation," she said. No one contradicted her. She crossed to the printer and retrieved the remaining fraudulent reports. At the bottom of each, beneath the stolen signature, she added the time and date she had discovered it. Nolan watched her stack the pages carefully. Until that moment, Mara had carried herself as though the worst consequence of her mistakes would be professional disgrace. Now she understood that false approvals could become physical events: contaminated wells, collapsed ground, human beings told that no one could have known. She handed the documents to Celia. "Enter these into evidence," she said, "and record that I should have challenged the contractor data months ago." Celia met her eyes. "I'll record what happened, not what guilt wants to rewrite." The words stopped Mara more effectively than reassurance would have. At 2:00 p.m., Nolan attempted the scheduled 6-hour check-in with his operations coordinator. The satellite terminal rejected the connection. He switched to the vehicle unit. No signal. Mara tested the tracking system in her government truck. The screen displayed a blank map and an error message indicating that the antenna had been disconnected. Nolan went outside and inspected the roof mount. The antenna cable had been cut cleanly beneath its protective sleeve. "This wasn't weather," he said. Celia called the Regional Coordination Center through her secure phone. The duty officer told her Copper Creek's survey team had checked out 90 minutes earlier. An automated message stated that Nolan, Mara, Leona, and August had departed safely because of the incoming storm. "I never submitted that," Nolan said. The message carried his contractor identification code. Someone had used the same method employed against Mara, not jamming the system, but speaking through it in their names. Mara retrieved an emergency satellite messenger from a locked case. The device had limited bandwidth and required several attempts before it acquired a clear view through the cloud cover. She sent one compressed message. "Team still on site. False checkout. Possible sabotage. Active explosive threat. Request federal and mine rescue response." The confirmation icon appeared after nearly a minute. A reply arrived 11 minutes later. County mine rescue and federal officers were approaching by road. Helicopter support had been grounded because of the storm. Estimated arrival, 4 hours, possibly longer if the eastern pass closed. Snow began falling at 3:15. The flakes were small and dry at first, moving sideways between the empty buildings. Morrow stood near the mine office entrance, nose raised, listening to doors and loose metal shift in the wind. Celia's phone vibrated. She read the incoming message twice. "A North Star response convoy passed the Western Highway camera 20 minutes ago," she said. "3 vehicles. They filed an emergency stabilization notice with the state." "We refused their help," Mara said. "They're coming anyway." Nolan looked toward the hidden entrance, then toward August's house. "They need what's inside that corridor," he said. "Any remaining cargo, transaction records, chemical containers." "And the signal system," Leona added. Celia closed her evidence notebook. "They'll claim the site required immediate action. If the drainage tunnel collapses after they arrive, they'll say they tried to prevent it." August had listened from the doorway. For 3 days he had resisted every suggestion that he leave Copper Creek before the work was complete. Now he looked toward the archive room, where Celia had boxed the copied tapes and Leona had duplicated the personnel records. "The originals can travel?" he asked. Celia nodded. 2 cases. Everything else is already copied." August took the yellow helmet numbered 17 from its hook. He held it for a moment, then set it on the kitchen table, rather than putting it on. "I'll leave," he said. Nolan did not praise the decision. August would have heard praise as condescension. "Bring your medication and 1 change of clothes," Nolan said. "Nothing more." August picked up the dented blue thermos. "This counts as medication." They carried the archive cases to Nolan's truck. Snow thickened across the windshield as he placed Morrow in the rear and helped August into the passenger seat. Mara and Leona loaded the sample containers into the government vehicle. Celia stood near the road, checking the western approach through binoculars. Nolan turned the ignition. The engine cranked once, coughed, and died. He tried again. Nothing. He opened the hood and found a wet sheen beneath the fuel filter. The line had been sliced where it passed behind the engine block, hidden from any casual inspection. Mara tested her truck. Its fuel line had been cut as well. Leona's vehicle would not start at all. Sugar-like crystals had been poured into the filler neck, though Nolan could not yet tell whether they had reached the tank. The evacuation had been disabled before they decided to attempt it. Celia lowered the binoculars. Across the western ridge, 3 pairs of headlights appeared through the snow. They descended the pass in a slow, disciplined line. North Star logos gleamed faintly on the doors. August looked back at his house, not with the grief of a man refusing to leave, but with the recognition that the choice had already been taken from him. Nolan closed the hood, the first vehicle reached the valley floor. "They're not here to stabilize the mine," he said. The lights continued toward Copper Creek, growing brighter as the storm erased the road behind them. The 3 North Star trucks entered Copper Creek with amber emergency lights flashing through the snow. From a distance, they looked legitimate. The lead vehicle carried roof-mounted work lamps, recovery chains, and a folded stretcher strapped behind the cab. The men who stepped out wore insulated rescue coveralls, white helmets, and reflective jackets marked with the North Star emblem. Nolan counted 6. At least 2 carried more weight beneath their coats than radios required. "Positions," he said. No one argued. Mara and Leona took the eastern path toward the old pump station, carrying the drainage plans, portable lights, and the manual valve tools August had identified. Their task was not to repair the entire system. They only needed to lower the water accumulating behind the tailings embankment and reduce the damage if the drainage tunnel collapsed. Celia returned to August's house with the evidence cases. She began copying files onto 3 encrypted drives while attempting to reconnect with the federal response team through the emergency satellite messenger. Nolan remained near the mine office with Morrow. August sat at the old communications desk, where a wooden switchboard and a row of cracked brass labels still clung to the wall. "The power is dead," Nolan said. "The mine line never depended on town power." August opened a metal cabinet beneath the desk. Inside sat a bank of replacement batteries, wiring clips, and an old hand-crank telephone. "You maintained this?" "I maintained the batteries. The cables were already here." He connected 2 leads, turned the crank, and listened. A bell rang faintly inside the pump station. A moment later, Mara's voice came through the receiver. "We hear you." August allowed himself a brief smile. "Then the dead system remains inconveniently alive." The lead North Star man approached the mine office with 2 others behind him. He was broad through the chest, perhaps in his late 40s, with ice collecting in a close gray beard. A laminated emergency credential hung from his coat. "Grant Voss," he called. "North Star Incident Supervisor, we have authorization to stabilize the site and evacuate all personnel." Celia stepped into the doorway before Nolan could answer. "Who issued the authorization?" "State Emergency Coordination." "Reference number?" Voss handed her a printed dispatch sheet. Celia read it once. "This code belongs to a road closure request from last year." Voss's expression remained steady. "The system recycles incident numbers." "No, it doesn't." The 2 men behind him shifted their feet. Celia held up her badge. "This site is under federal evidentiary control. Your crew will remain outside the marked perimeter until your authorization is independently confirmed." Voss looked past her toward the archive cases. "We were told lives were in danger." "They are." "Then let trained responders work." Nolan saw the moment the performance ended, not through a threat or sudden movement, but through Voss's eyes. They stopped searching Celia's face and began measuring doors, windows, and distances. Voss stepped back. His right hand moved beneath his coat. "Inside," Nolan said. Celia closed the door. A heavy object struck the exterior wall seconds later. The mine office windows shattered inward, not from gunfire, but from a steel rescue bar thrown through the glass. The North Star team divided immediately. 2 men moved toward the hidden western entrance. 2 circled north toward August's house. Voss and another man advanced toward the pump station road. "They know the site," Nolan said. August lifted the mine telephone. "Mara, 2 coming east. Shut off the exterior lights." The pump station vanished into darkness. Nolan led Morrow through the rear door of the mine office and across the old rail yard. Snow had begun filling his footprints before he reached the first switch stand. August's voice came through Nolan's radio. "Track 2 still has a loaded ore cart." "I saw it. Brakes are rusted." "The hand brake is rusted. The cable brake runs through the shed." Nolan entered the haulage shed and found the release wheel beneath layers of dust. He turned it half a revolution. Outside, metal groaned. The ore cart began rolling down the slight grade, slow at first, then faster. It crossed the service road and struck a timber stop, spilling old waste rock across the path between the North Star trucks and the pump station. Voss was forced to retreat as the cart blocked the road. The maneuver bought perhaps 3 minutes. That was enough. Mara and Leona entered the pump station and secured the inner door. Through the mine phone, Mara reported that the first bypass valve still responded, but the second was frozen. "Do not force it," August told her. "Warm the housing. If the stem snaps, the gate stays shut." Nolan crossed the crushing yard with Morrow ahead of him. A portable generator North Star had unloaded near the trucks was running hard, sending exhaust into the wind. August directed Nolan to a ventilation louver beside the old compressor room. Nolan pulled the corroded handle until the blades opened. The wind caught the generator exhaust and dragged the gray smoke through an underground service duct. Moments later, smoke emerged from 2 vents near the boarding house and another behind the machine shop. The North Star men turned toward 3 different locations. One shouted that someone was moving through the buildings. There was no one there. August had not created ghosts. He had only remembered where the mine once breathed. At the communications desk, he pulled a sequence of small levers linked to the old haulage signal wires. A bell rang at the crushing mill. 2 short strikes answered from the head frame. A third sounded near the western portal. The North Star crew hesitated, unable to tell whether the signals were intentional, mechanical failure, or instructions being passed around them. Nolan used the confusion to move toward August's house. He did not fire at the men or attempt to hunt them through the snow. Every confrontation risked drawing attention away from the pump station and the hidden corridor. His purpose was to keep the group separated, mobile, and alive until outside help arrived. Morrow suddenly stopped beside the wash. His head turned north. 2 North Star men were approaching the house through the junipers, using the fence line as cover. Nolan signaled August through the radio. "Leave the desk, south door." No answer. "August!" Static crackled, followed by a cough. Nolan ran. Morrow reached the house first. He crossed the porch, then spun back toward the roof instead of pursuing the approaching men. Snow had accumulated heavily above the damaged awning. A support beam had split where the earlier windstorm twisted it. The roof sagged with a low wooden creak. August emerged from the side door, one hand holding the blue thermos, and the other pressing his coat closed. Morrow moved directly in front of him. The awning broke. Nolan reached August as the roof came down. He seized the old man beneath one arm and pulled him into the yard. Morrow pressed against August's legs, driving him away from the falling timber. The awning collapsed across the porch. One of the North Star men jumped backward. The other disappeared behind a burst of snow and splintered wood. Neither fired. Their line of approach had been blocked. Nolan guided August behind the stone foundation of the neighboring house. August bent forward, struggling for air. Medication. August pointed toward his coat pocket. Nolan found the inhaler and placed it in his hand. The old man took one measured breath, waited, then took another. His fingers trembled, but his eyes remained focused. Morrow stood so close that his shoulder touched August's knee. "You trained him to come back?" August asked. "He was never chasing them." "No." August looked at the dog. He heard the beam. Nolan rested one hand on Morrow's harness. For years he had described the dog's loyalty in terms of obedience, staying beside him, following signals, finishing the search. Yet Morrow had abandoned the obvious threat because something quieter had become more dangerous. He had chosen whom to protect. The distinction unsettled Nolan because it felt too much like judgment. August straightened carefully. "The cable." "What?" "The new signal line, the old junction under the south hoist, connects the drainage run to the western drift." "You said the maps were incomplete?" They are, but the phone wires and blasting circuits use the same access chamber. Can you identify it from the surface? August shook his head. They rebuilt that section after I left. The junction may still be there, but the approach will not match my memory. A burst of radio traffic sounded through Nolan's receiver. North Star's crew was regrouping near the western slope. Nolan moved August toward the mine office, but the old man resisted. Mara needs the route. Mara needs you breathing. She needs both. Nolan keyed the phone circuit and gave Mara the revised location. She confirmed that the water level behind the embankment had begun to drop. The reduction was small, but measurable. Celia reached them through the rear of the assay building. I copied the files, she said. One drive with me, one hidden in the pump station, one transmitted in fragments. The satellite link is unstable, but some of it got through. How long until rescue? Nolan asked. Best estimate, 70 minutes. The pass is slowing them. We may not have 70. They returned to the false western entrance by a route behind the maintenance sheds. The North Star men had left the steel door partly open. Fresh boot prints led inside. Morrow began working the outer wall. His movement slowed near a secondary adit, almost hidden by collapsed timber. Nolan checked the air at the entrance. Oxygen remained within safe limits. No immediate toxic gas alarm sounded, though the reading applied only to the first accessible section. Morrow moved to the right side of the opening and sat. Another explosive alert. Nolan examined the wall with a light. A black signal cable entered the rock through a drilled sleeve, running toward the underground junction August had described. From somewhere inside came the repeated metallic knock of loose conduit striking stone. Morrow's body stiffened, his ears flattened, then rose again. He took one step backward. Nolan unclipped the working lead. That's enough. Morrow looked at him. You stay with August. The dog did not move toward the old man. His breathing had quickened, but his gaze remained fixed on Nolan. Nolan checked his gas meter, rescue line, radio, and headlamp. He marked the entrance and prepared to go only far enough to locate the junction, not to dismantle the entire system or pursue anyone deeper underground. He stepped toward the adit. Morrow followed. Nolan turned and pointed back. Stay. The German shepherd stopped, but only for a moment. Then Morrow crossed the distance and stood against Nolan's left leg, close enough that their bodies touched. The bent tip of his right ear trembled each time metal struck in the darkness. August watched from several yards away. He is still afraid, the old man said. I know. No, you know the sound frightens him. August's breathing remained rough, but his voice was steady. What frightens him more is letting you go where he cannot follow. Nolan looked down at Morrow. The dog did not appear brave. His muscles were tight, his mouth closed, his attention divided between the tunnel and the man beside him. Courage was not the absence of fear. Nolan had used that sentence too many times to believe it meant anything. Morrow made it mean something. Before Nolan could enter, Celia raised one hand for silence. She had taken a North Star radio from the gear dropped near the collapsed porch. A voice came through the speaker, distorted by static. Voss was reporting that the pump station remained inaccessible. Another voice answered. Silas Crowder. Forget the station. I'm entering from the western side. Prepare the secondary line. Celia increased the volume. How long? Voss asked. 45 minutes before Federal units reach the lower pass. Less if they clear the wreck. And the people? Keep them away from the drainage junction. The transmission ended. Snow swept across the tunnel mouth. Nolan secured Morrow's lead to his harness, not to hold him back, but to keep them connected in the dark. Celia checked her watch. 45 minutes, she said. August looked into the adit where the signal cable vanished. Then that is all the time the mountain is giving us. The air at the secondary adit was cold, dry, and barely moving. Nolan held the gas meter inside the opening until the numbers stabilized. Oxygen remained within a survivable range. Carbon monoxide was low. No methane alarm sounded, though the readings could change deeper underground. He clipped the meter to his chest, anchored a guide rope beside the entrance, and tied fluorescent markers at regular intervals along the line. August watched from behind him, one hand braced against the rock. "You stay here," Nolan said. The old man wore his faded brown coveralls beneath the winter coat. His yellow helmet, number 17, peeling across the front, sat low over his silver hair. An inhaler filled one chest pocket. The dented blue thermos had finally been left behind. "You said that at the house," August replied, "and you nearly stopped breathing." "I did stop arguing." "That is not the same thing." Nolan turned the cable camera toward the passage. The first 20 yards matched the partial survey ledger, narrow adit, low ceiling, drainage channel along the left wall. After that, new steel supports interrupted the original stone. The corridor split into 3 branches where August's map showed only one. Someone had widened the junction, poured concrete around the floor, and removed the old directional plates. Morrow stood beside Nolan, body tense but controlled. Each distant strike of loose conduit made the bent tip of his right ear twitch. Nolan advanced the camera into the left branch. Broken timbers. Loose rock. No visible cable. The center branch descended sharply and vanished beneath standing water. The right branch carried the black signal line. A white symbol had been painted on the wall beside it, a circle divided by 2 short vertical strokes. August leaned toward the monitor. "That mark was there before North Star. You recognize it? Emergency airflow bypass." "The ledger doesn't show one." "The ledger is missing a page." August studied the image, breathing through his nose. If the original mark survived, that branch reaches the drainage level. The center route goes beneath the collapse zone. Nolan looked at the dark water filling the central passage. "And if you're wrong?" "You reach ground that was failing before either of us arrived." Nolan tightened the strap on his helmet. "I can follow the cable." "The cable may have been routed to mislead anyone who found it." "That doesn't mean you're coming." August touched the number on his helmet. "I am going to the first junction. No farther. You can't move fast enough if the readings change." "Then you will have to move slowly enough to notice before they do." Nolan disliked the answer because it was true. He could read explosive placement and modern modifications. August could read the original mind beneath them. Neither knowledge replaced the other. Nolan gave him a spare gas monitor and attached a short safety line between their harnesses. "One junction," he said. August nodded. Morrow entered between them. The passage narrowed quickly. Nolan went first, checking the ceiling, the air, and each fresh drill hole around the signal cable. August followed with careful steps, his breathing amplified by the confined space. Morrow moved ahead, then returned every few yards to touch his nose against August's hand or knee. The dog was not searching continuously. He was counting them. At the first turn, the metallic knocking grew louder. Morrow froze. Nolan raised one hand. The German shepherd looked at him, mouth closed, amber eyes reflecting the headlamp. Nolan gave the familiar focus signal, 2 fingers toward his own eyes, then downward. Morrow's gaze settled on Nolan. His breathing slowed enough for them to continue. August had seen the exchange. "He trusts the signal," he whispered. "He trusts me." August looked at the dog walking close to Nolan's leg. "There is a difference." They reached the altered junction. The original stone walls had been cut back and reinforced with concrete. New electrical conduit ran beside rusted mine wiring. The signal cable entered a gray control box bolted to the wall, then split into several insulated lines. One continued toward the drainage tunnel. A second disappeared into a narrow service shaft. A third connected to a compact radio receiver with a status light blinking green. Nolan stopped everyone well short of the box. He photographed the layout, checked for anti-tamper switches, and examined the cable path without touching anything. "Remote receiver," he said. "Hardline backup too." "Can you stop it?" August asked. "I can stop the receiver from accepting a signal. That doesn't make the charges safe." Morrow moved along the wall and alerted twice, once near the service shaft and again toward the drainage passage. Multiple explosive placements. Nolan opened his notebook and drew a quick diagram. He marked the receiver, the backup line, and the locations of Morrow's alerts. He could not trace and disarm every charge before Silas arrived. Attempting it would take hours and a specialized disposal team. What he could do was isolate the command system. He removed the exterior cover from the receiver housing, leaving the internal circuitry untouched. A separate junction block carried power and command signals into the mine. The arrangement was simple by design. Simplicity survived damp, cold, and neglect. Nolan attached a diagnostic lead and confirmed the line was armed. A small indicator showed continuity through at least 4 circuits. He did not know the exact number of charges. "August, take Morrow back 10 yards. The old man obeyed without argument. Nolan disconnected the receiver's external antenna first. The green light remained on. That prevented the easiest remote command, but left the hardline backup intact. He traced the backup to a protected terminal and installed an isolation bridge from his kit, interrupting the command path without cutting the wire abruptly enough to trigger a tamper response. The green light turned amber, then red. Nothing exploded. Nolan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "The main receiver is isolated," he said. "Do not touch the box. The charges and detonators are still live." August looked toward the drainage passage. "Then the mountain is still holding its breath." "No, it is waiting for someone qualified to finish the job." A voice came from the darkness behind them. "You always did believe qualification made men honest." Silas Crowder stepped into the junction with 2 North Star men. His charcoal shell was wet with snow around the shoulders. Silver blonde hair had fallen across his forehead, disturbing the polished appearance he had maintained above ground. A pistol rested low in his right hand. Grant Voss stood beside him, breathing heavily from the descent. The third man was younger, narrow-faced and visibly uncertain, carrying a pry bar rather than a firearm. Silas looked at the red indicator on the receiver. "You've made this unnecessarily expensive." Nolan shifted slightly, placing himself between Silas and August. "You falsified federal records, contaminated wells, and wired a tailings drain to collapse." Silas's expression barely changed. "Copper Creek was contaminated before I ever bought a truck." "That was your defense?" "It is a fact." "Facts don't become permission." Silas glanced toward the old walls. "This place poisoned men for 70 years. Companies changed names. Agencies changed forms. Everyone collected salaries and called delay responsibility. I found value in what they abandoned." "By using cleanup permits to move narcotics?" "By using infrastructure no one wanted to pay to secure." He spoke as if correcting a misunderstanding in a contract. "The mine will fail eventually," Silas continued. "The drainage system is obsolete. The embankment is already unstable. After the storm, no expert will be able to separate one winter failure from another." "Leona already separated the contamination pulses," Nolan said, "for a report. Reports can be challenged." August stepped forward until the safety line tightened. "And the 5 men?" Silas looked at him with mild irritation. 5 names from 40 years ago do not outweigh everything tied to this operation. They were never given names in the record. Then they are not the record. August's face remained still. A place does not become ownerless because the people inside it died. Silas lifted the pistol slightly. August continued. "And silence is not consent. Not from the dead, not from the land, not from anyone you decided was too small to count. For the first time, anger broke through Silas's composure. You stayed here protecting boxes while the rest of the world moved on. No, August said. The world moved around what it refused to face. A faint siren sounded somewhere above ground. The younger North Star man turned toward the passage. Silas's attention followed for half a second. Nolan moved. He struck Silas's wrist against the control box frame. The pistol fell, but skidded beneath a pipe beyond immediate reach. Voss drove into Nolan from the side, forcing him against the wall. The fight lasted seconds. There was no room for wide movements. Nolan trapped Voss's arm, shifted his weight, and drove him down onto the concrete floor. The younger man backed toward the entrance as another siren echoed through the tunnel. "Federal response!" a distant voice called through a loudspeaker above ground. The younger man dropped the pry bar and ran. Silas reached beneath his jacket and pulled out a small remote control. Nolan saw his thumb press the switch. The receiver remained red. No blast came. Silas looked at the device, then at Nolan. "You disconnected it." "I isolated it." The distinction mattered only to the people who would later enter with bomb suits and disposal tools. Silas turned and fled toward the western access. Nolan started after him. Behind him, stone cracked. Not loudly. A dry, splitting sound passed through the ceiling. The impact of the struggle had dislodged fractured rock around an old timber support. "Move!" Nolan shouted. A section of the junction roof collapsed. Dust swallowed the light. August fell beneath the edge of the slide. A rock struck his lower leg and pinned it against the floor. The conduit overhead tore free and crashed against the wall. Morrow stopped moving. The dog stood in the center of the passage, legs rigid, eyes wide. Metallic echoes struck from every direction as loose pipe continued to swing. Nolan could still see Silas's light retreating down the tunnel. For one instant, the old calculation returned. Distance, time, threat, capture. Then he looked back. August was trying to free his leg. Morrow remained frozen between them, trapped inside a sound no one else could hear the same way. Nolan let Silas go. He returned to August, shifted the smaller stones, and tested the pinned leg. No bone protruded, but the ankle had twisted badly. "The receiver?" August asked through clenched teeth. "Isolated." "The embankment?" Mara opened the bypass valves. "The water level is dropping." "Then stop looking after him." Nolan had not realized he was still watching the tunnel where Silas disappeared. He turned fully away from it. Together, Nolan and Voss, who had stopped resisting when the roof fell, lifted the largest rock from August's leg. Nolan secured Voss's wrists with a restraint, then looped August's arm across his shoulders. Morrow still had not moved. Nolan crouched in front of him. The pipe struck the wall again. Morrow flinched, but remained rigid. Nolan did not pull the harness. He raised 2 fingers toward his eyes. "Morrow." The dog's gaze found his. Nolan lowered his hand, palm open. "Breathe." It was not an official command. It had become theirs during recovery work after the collapse that first changed Morrow. Nolan inhaled slowly, held it, released, again. Morrow's chest moved. The German shepherd took one uncertain step, then another. He pressed his muzzle into Nolan's palm. "Good." August leaned against the wall, pain paling his face. Morrow moved to him next, touching his nose to the old man's injured leg before turning toward the right-hand passage. A faint current lifted the fur along his neck. Cleaner air. Morrow began walking. Nolan supported August while guiding the restrained Voss ahead of them. The route rose gradually, following the airflow August had recognized from the old emergency mark. Behind them, another section of the altered junction collapsed. Dust filled the route they had used to enter, but the drainage passage remained intact. Above ground, Celia had already sent August's old transport map to the approaching officers and county mine rescue crew. The map showed a western haul road omitted from current navigation systems. Silas reached that road in one of the North Star trucks. He drove toward the ridge, believing the storm and the forgotten route would carry him beyond the response perimeter. Instead, Federal vehicles waited at the far end. Silas tried to reverse. The rear wheels crossed a rail line hidden beneath the snow, and the truck slid sideways into the old track bed. When officers surrounded the vehicle, he remained behind the wheel for nearly a minute. Then he placed both hands where they could be seen and surrendered. Nolan knew none of this when Morrow led them toward daylight. The tunnel narrowed, then opened beneath a ventilation shed near the eastern slope. Mine rescue workers broke through the outer panel as the first gray light of morning spread across the snow. Nolan brought August out first. Morrow followed, blinking beneath a sky slowly turning gold over the red hills. Mara and Leona had kept the bypass valves open. The embankment remained stable. The main drainage tunnel had not collapsed. The chamber behind the historic cave-in was still accessible for a later recovery team. Part of the secondary passage had fallen, but the mountain had not buried everything. August sat on a rescue blanket while a medic examined his leg. Morrow stood between his knees, refusing to move until Nolan touched the dog's shoulder. In the western distance, Silas was led away from the disabled truck. Nolan watched only briefly. Then he turned back to August and Morrow as sunlight reached Copper Creek for the first time since the storm began. By spring, Copper Creek had become crowded with people who had once insisted there was nothing left there. Federal investigators occupied the old assay office. Mine rescue crews built a controlled access route through the eastern slope. Hydrologists placed monitoring stations along the seasonal wash, and evidence technicians cataloged every container, shipping label, and fragment of modern pipe recovered from the hidden corridor. The snow retreated slowly, revealing red soil beneath the white in long, uneven scars. North Star's records collapsed faster. The false closure certificates led investigators to other abandoned sites. Truck manifests connected Copper Creek to transfer yards and warehouses across several states. Hazardous material permits had concealed shipments of chemical precursors, packaged narcotics, and cash. Modern industrial waste had been diluted into mine sludge, then released in amounts small enough to resemble historical contamination. Silas Crowder was charged alongside Grant Voss and several North Star employees. Evan Rusk's abandoned account had not been the work of one rogue technician. It had been kept alive deliberately, used whenever the company needed an approval that no honest inspector would provide. The charges were extensive. They did not make the wells clean, they did not restore the lost years, and they did not turn Nolan into the man who had solved everything. He testified to what he had seen, identified the command receiver he had isolated, and explained the limits of what Morrow's alerts could establish. Whenever an attorney tried to make his role larger, Nolan corrected the record. Leona had traced the contamination pulses. August had preserved the mine history. Celia had protected the evidence. Mara had found the stolen approvals. The rescue team had prevented a second collapse. Nolan had done his part. For most of his life, that sentence would have felt insufficient. Now it felt accurate. Mara gave her testimony without asking for protection from the consequences. She admitted that budget pressure and trust in contractor data had narrowed what she was willing to question. She had not known about the smuggling operation, but she had accepted clean paperwork where the field evidence should have been messy. After the hearing, she helped design a new inspection process. No closure could be approved solely through contractor photographs. High-risk sites required independent field verification, separate credential controls, and consultation with downstream communities before final stabilization. Her name remained on the original project. It also appeared on the corrections. Leona established a long-term monitoring network across the recharge zone. Sampling results were shared simultaneously with Navajo Nation EPA, federal agencies, county officials, and representatives from affected communities. No single office held the only copy. Celia insisted on that structure. "Secrecy is useful during an investigation," she told Nolan. "It is dangerous as a permanent form of ownership." August heard the remark and gave no sign that he agreed. He did, however, hand Celia the last cassette tapes from his archive. The recovery of the missing workers took longer than the criminal case. Mine rescue specialists entered the chamber behind the historic collapse only after the remaining explosives had been removed and the weakened rock reinforced. They found 5 sets of remains in a narrow maintenance space beyond the original rescue boundary. The men had not died together in a dramatic final circle. 2 had been near a tool cabinet. 1 lay beside an emergency water line. The others had reached the far wall, where the ventilation passage had been blocked by the collapse. The arrangement suggested they had survived for some time. No one tried to guess how long. Rafael Ortega was identified through dental records preserved by a surviving niece. Samuel Pete was matched through military medical files from his brief service years earlier. Leon Mercer was identified by a healed fracture in his left forearm and a ring listed in an old family letter. The other 2 remained numbers for months. August attended every identification meeting. He brought the same blue thermos and sat with his injured leg extended beneath the table. The fracture had healed, though he now used a dark wooden cane on uneven ground. He never asked the specialists to hurry. One afternoon in late summer, Celia came to his house carrying a thin evidence folder. Nolan was outside with Morrow, replacing a broken section of fence. The German shepherd no longer wore his working harness unless they were on an active survey. His coat had thickened again after the winter, gold beneath the sun and black across the back. The tip of his right ear still leaned outward. August called them in. Celia placed 2 photographs on the kitchen table. The man known as Birdie had been identified as Thomas Birdsong, a 34-year-old laborer from New Mexico. His surname had produced the nickname. A fingerprint card from an old construction license had survived in a county archive. Red clay had been harder. His legal name was Daniel Clay Redhouse, 41, Diné, employed through a labor broker that had reversed 2 parts of his name on a handwritten roster. Over the years, Clay Red had become Red Clay in the memories of the men who worked beside him. August read both names without speaking. Then he opened the black survey ledger and wrote them beneath the 3 he had known. His hand shook once. He stopped, waited, and completed each letter carefully. Morrow moved beneath the table and rested his head against August's uninjured knee. August placed his palm over the dog's bent ear. "For 42 years, he said, 2 men were reduced to sounds people remembered." Celia sat across from him. "Not anymore." August closed the ledger. That evening, he removed the label marked Unknown from the last archive box. The memorial was built the following winter on a low rise above the mine yard. August rejected the first proposal, which included a visitor center, an observation deck, and a polished sculpture of a miner raising a lamp toward the sky. "They did not die to improve tourism," he said. The final design was smaller. A long wall of local red stone stood beside the old rail line. Every worker killed in Copper Creek appeared in the same-sized lettering. Supervisors, temporary laborers, veterans, immigrants, and men hired through subcontractors were listed without separate ranks. The 12 names from the official record came first by date, not status. The 5 recovered men appeared among them: Rafael Ortega, Samuel Pete, Leon Mercer, Thomas Birdsong, Daniel Clay Redhouse. No category identified them as the forgotten. The fact that they had names was enough. August wore a dark indigo coat to the dedication, with a small silver and turquoise bolo tie at his collar. The yellow helmet, numbered 17, rested against the base of the wall. He did not give a long speech. He thanked the families who had provided records. He thanked the recovery crews. Then he said the wall was not meant to make Copper Creek innocent. "A place can hold beauty and harm at the same time," he told the gathered crowd. "Remembering one does not erase the other." Morrow sat beside Nolan in a light surface search harness. He watched the people rather than the wall. After the ceremony, Nolan met with the interagency assessment group he had agreed to join. The team included engineers, explosive hazard specialists, hydrologists, community representatives, federal investigators, and working dog handlers. Nolan was not its commander. At the first meeting, he had caught himself waiting for everyone to defer to the person with operational experience. They had not. Leona challenged the proposed access route because it crossed a sensitive drainage area. Mara revised the plan. Celia demanded stronger evidence controls. A local representative asked why the community had been consulted only after technical options had already been narrowed. Nolan listened. Then he changed his recommendation. The process took longer. It was better. Morrow's evaluation cleared him for open ground detection, vehicle searches, and training demonstrations. Enclosed underground work was removed from his duties. Nolan did not appeal. He began bringing Morrow to surface surveys, where the dog could work through juniper, snow, and exposed rock without the metallic echoes that had followed him underground. Younger handlers learned more from watching Morrow pause than from watching him alert. He did not rush scent. He did not perform for praise. He worked until the task was done, then returned to Nolan's side. By the end of winter, August had emptied most of the house. Copies of the mine records went to Navajo Nation EPA, a federal archive, legal counsel for the families, and a regional historical collection. The original tapes were digitized. The time cards were stored in climate-controlled cases. For the first time in decades, the back room had bare shelves. Nolan found August standing there one morning, listening to the emptiness. "You don't have to leave yet," Nolan said. August leaned on his cane. "That sounds like something people say when they need more time." "Do you?" "No." He had arranged to live closer to relatives and medical care in a community where the nearest neighbor was measured in minutes rather than miles. "I stayed because someone had to know where everything was," August said. "Then I stayed because I no longer trusted anyone else to carry it." He looked at the empty shelves. That was necessary until it wasn't. Before leaving, August gave the house key to Celia. The property would remain in his name while environmental work continued, but she would control access to the archive room during the final transfer. The remaining document boxes went with Leona. To Nolan, August gave a single worn time card. The surface had faded until the employee name was unreadable. Only a partial date and the impression of a punched clock remained. "You already found their names," Nolan said. "This one may not belong to any of them." "Then why keep it?" August placed it inside Nolan's Navy notebook. "So you remember that an empty line does not mean no one stood there." They climbed the ridge above Copper Creek before August departed. The town looked smaller from that height. Snow covered the mine roofs again, but the monitoring stations stood visible along the wash. The headframe had been stabilized rather than demolished. The red memorial wall caught the sun below. Light reflected from broken windows and sheets of old metal, moving across the empty buildings until it seemed that lamps were being lit room by room. Nolan remembered the first yellow bulb in the tower. He had never learned who switched it on. Investigators found a portable battery and a length of wire months later, but no usable prints. It might have been a North Star worker signaling a vehicle. It might have been someone testing the hidden route. The explanation mattered less now. August looked down at the town. "People will call them ghosts," Nolan said. "People call anything a ghost when they do not want to admit it was left unfinished." "What do you call them?" August watched the sunlight move over the roofs. Memories that finally found their way back to the living. His truck waited below, packed with 2 suitcases, the blue thermos and the yellow helmet numbered 17. Morrow stood beside August before he climbed inside. The old man bent carefully and placed both hands along the dog's neck. "You kept choosing correctly," August told him. Morrow touched his scarred muzzle to August's coat. The truck moved down the road a few minutes later. Wind passed through Copper Creek and caught the old haulage line. A bell rang somewhere near the crushing mill, one long note rolling across the snow. Morrow raised his head. His body did not tighten. He listened until the sound faded, then sat beside Nolan. Together they watched August's tire tracks stretch across the white plateau, growing smaller beneath the clear winter light, until the road carried him beyond the town that no longer needed one man to remember it. Copper Creek reminds us that silence does not erase a wrong, and a missing name does not mean a life had no value. Most of us will never stand inside a collapsing mine, but every day we face smaller choices, whether to look away, whether to speak when something is wrong, and whether to remember those the world has overlooked. Doing what is right may not make us heroes. Sometimes it simply means refusing to let another person disappear. What part of this story stayed with you? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the choices that define us. May God give you the strength to stand for what is right and the wisdom to know when your voice is needed.